Welcome to the TechFace podcast. We at TechFace are all about connecting female tech communities with companies to support their members finding a meaningful career in tech. In this podcast, we interview women who have a career in tech to inspire your own journey. Let's listen to our next guest on this episode. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Chanel to this podcast. Chanel and we have crossed ways at a couple of events, but we never really had very long discussions. The last time I met you, you told me how you got into tech, and I thought that's quite a fascinating story. But before we get into that, you better start yourself first introducing and what you're doing right now.
Thank you very much, Priska. My name is Chanel Greco, and at the moment, I'm the lead teacher at Master 21 Academy. We're an academy that is specialized on helping business professionals navigate the digital world nowadays. And my main goal is to teach them coding skills, but also to show them how they can use technology in their day-to-day life, in their business life, and how they can better collaborate with especially web developers.
That's fantastic, because this is something we definitely need in the future more and more than today. So tell me, how long have you been working in the tech industry already, or what kind of roles have you taken on?
Well, I've had quite a lot of amounts of roles, actually. I went through it yesterday thinking about what I've done, and it's a total of 13 years that I'm in tech now. I started out as a hard and software supporter. So I have a background as an office clerk. I worked in bookkeeping, and then I got into the tech field, and that was as a hard and software supporter for Toshiba notebooks. After that, I got into IT project management, so leading infrastructure and software projects at a larger corporate company in Switzerland. I did that for quite an amount of years, and at a certain point I thought, isn't it time for me myself to learn how to code instead of only telling others what to do in projects? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to build something myself? And that's when I got into web development. Started out with HTML, CSS, a bit of JavaScript. Then I learned Ruby, and I worked as a full stack developer, mainly with Ruby on Rails for about 1.5, almost 2 years. Yeah, after that, I decided this year to start as a coding teacher. So that's something I have been doing in my free time for Master 21 as a freelancer. And this year in January, I joined as a proper member of the team.
Sounds amazing. Let me go back again to when you switched into the tech industry by becoming a hardware and software supporter. So you were an office clerk, and then you decided to go doing this hardware, software support. What made you do this? Was there a certain moment, something that gave you this tick saying, okay, now I need to move on? Or how did you get to this chance?
Well, actually, let's start at the beginning. The first time I actually got in contact with a computer, I was about 9 years old when my father bought his first computer. And I was very intrigued by this interesting looking machine. And luckily, I'd say, there was a video game installed on this computer. So the friend of my dad's who sold us the computer, he installed an Indiana Jones jump and run game. And I was fascinated. So I got really hooked on video games. And the video games also got me interested in computers. And that's something I had all throughout my high school. And when the time came to decide what for an apprenticeship I wanted to do, I was torn back and forth between an IT apprenticeship and a normal office clerk. I have to say, back then I decided for the office clerk because that's what most of the girls did. So, you want to fit in when you're very young at age. And I only had one classmate who did an IT apprenticeship, and that was a guy. So I thought, well, maybe this isn't for girls. I'll just do an office clerk apprenticeship. But my interest in tech was so big that after I finished my education and I was about 20, 21 years old, I knew I simply have to do something with computers. And that's what motivated me to get into support because that back in the day was like kind of the standard way that you would go if you wanted to start a career in IT or in tech. And also here, luckily, a friend of my husband, or my back then he was my boyfriend, he had his own tech company, and he did the hard and software support for Toshiba notebooks in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
So he heard of me, I applied, and he had a job opening, and he said, why not? Let's give it a try. And that's how I got into tech.
But I can see you touched the tech industry or tech topic already early in your life with 9 years. And I think this is something I see a lot in other women working in tech as well, that they got to get the chance working with computers quite early in their life. So I think it's quite important that we keep doing this, especially with kids in school as well. You also mentioned then you became the IT project manager, and then you were intrigued by knowing more about coding as well. And you went into web development, CSS, JavaScript. How did you do that? Like, that's also, again, a big switch. And what I hear a lot of times is, oh, you need to study this at ETH or any other university. What did you do to do this switch?
I started out by buying books. I love to read, so I bought books about web design. So I started first with web design and then web development. The classical thing, first HTML, CSS, you get a hold of it and you notice, oh, this is really easy. You have the instant gratification when you design and you code something and you see it in your web browser. And the next logical step was JavaScript, also there by reading books. I noticed that's a bit more difficult, so I started online courses. First, I looked for online courses that were for free. The next step was when I found something that I really liked, I bought myself a subscription and I would learn almost every day. That's how I got into it.
But were you still working at the time when you were learning, or was it like a side hustle kind of?
No, actually, I took a sabbatical when I started looking into web design and development. So I was lucky enough to be able to dedicate a lot of time into learning.
And then when did you land your first job as a web developer?
I landed my first job after a couple of months. I created a simple website with all the know-how I had back then, and I sent it out to different software agencies, web development agencies. Mm-hmm. And that's how I applied for an internship. And I had one interview at Punter. They're specialized on web applications, back then mainly with Ruby on Rails. And they interviewed me. They liked especially that I was doing it on my own, to see my discipline and my willingness to learn. And they gave me a chance to do an internship at their software agency.
That's quite important. It's something recruiters should look out as well, that when you apply for jobs, why do you want to go in there and how did you get your knowledge as well? So I think it's great to hear that it is possible to get into a coding position, I would say, without having the degree. What do you love today about your job? Today you're a teacher, you're teaching others how to code. What do you love about this? Or what did you love about web design as well? So maybe we can look at both.
Well, also here, let me take you back to when I was 14 and in high school. We had to write an essay about something. I wrote it about Florida because that's where I was born, and I've always been a big fan of the nice sunshine state in America. And after we wrote this essay, we had to present it in front of the whole school class. And you can imagine a lot of 14-year-olds being very nervous and not having done this very often. Well, after my presentation, I remember very clearly my high school teacher saying, Chanel, you're a teacher. You have to become a teacher. You can stand in front of people and explain things. And I put this off as total nonsense because I was thinking, I'm not going to teach terrible teenagers as we were. We always were bugging our poor teachers. So I thought, that's nothing for me. And now 20 years later, I noticed she was right. So me being a coding teacher, I'm combining two things that I'm passionate about: teaching other people, trying to explain technical, complex things in plain English, making sense for them, and web development, web design, being able to take a bunch of letters and numbers and make your software do something. These are two things that are very intriguing to me, very special to me, and I get to do this day after day as a lead teacher at Master 21.
So I think you found your dream job, your unicorn job with this.
Sounds very much like, so yeah.
But where do you see in general the tech is going? So I do believe you are, as a teacher, you are right in the middle, and you should see, or you have your opinion on where tech is going. So what do you share with our listeners? Where do you see tech is going?
One of the classes I teach at, for example, the private university Hovitzet is code literacy. And what I tell my students there is not everybody has to be a programmer, a coder, or has to go to ETH. But as Steve Jobs said, understanding how to program a computer will help you to think. And we're surrounded by software. This is something that won't go away. So the more we understand, also just on a high level, of how things work, of how APIs communicate, the better equipped we'll be for the future world we'll be living in. And that's what I try to tell people. Tech is here to stay. Tech isn't bad. Logically, you can misuse it for bad things, but we can do so much positive with tech. And I believe that anybody can learn a basic of, what is programming, of computational thinking, and that will help them in the future work and in their future lives.
Absolutely, I fully agree to that. And I think it's quite important to also, what you mentioned, raise awareness of that tech can do good as well. There is, unfortunately, it can do bad as well. But I think if we focus on the good parts, we see a bright future of tech.
Exactly.
What do you recommend people who want to get into tech? Like, I mean, you're a perfect example for being an office clerk, going into tech, doing this switch. But what would you recommend all the listeners? How can they do the switch?
Well, I would separate them into 10 groups, into two groups, excuse me. If you're like me, so very, very disciplined, or I call myself infinitely curious, then you can do a lot on your own. Then you can do online courses, you can read books, you can watch YouTube videos, listen to podcasts, and so on and so forth. That would be the first step. If you're somebody who needs a little bit more guidance, also more motivation, then I would look into more like a coding bootcamp like we have at Master 21. We also have weekend bootcamps, which is only Friday, Saturday. We have week-long bootcamps. There are other boot camps out there in Switzerland, in Europe, and so on and so forth. That would be a possibility. Go to meetups where you actually meet people who are already in tech, who can tell you about your job. And that would give you a bit more guidance, and you're not all on your own. So I would make a distinction between these two groups.
That sounds good. And I think everybody can decide for themselves where they feel more comfortable being in which group. Yeah.
And what I also want to say, of course, I didn't go to ETH, I didn't study, but I think that's also a possibility. If you say, hey, I want to go back to university or to ETH specifically, why not? If you have the possibilities, that I think that's also very good. You learn the basics of computers there, of course. So I would also gain a lot of knowledge that I don't have yet. So, I mean, that's also a very good way to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot for sharing this. Now,
You're welcome.
before we are closing this interview, I have a couple of speed questions for you, and you just answer what's on top of your mind. Who is your favorite female role model?
Oh, nobody and anybody. I meet so many interesting women in tech that I can't say one specific person.
And what fascinates you about these people in tech, or these women in tech you meet?
For me, always it's interesting people. I know this sounds a bit weird, but people who are good at math and got into programming because of that, because I'm terrible at math. I hate math. So for me, it's something that I admire in them, that they're good at something that I'm terribly bad at.
Okay, cool. What is your most important skill?
Ooh, I think my curiosity. That's what got me so far.
And what is the best advice you were ever given to?
Oh, wow, this is difficult. I think a couple of weeks back, talking with one of my working mates, that she really opened up my eyes and she showed me you're in your sweet spot. I don't have to do a lot of searching anymore. I can do a lot of giving now. I can really focus on giving back, especially to other women, what I've learned, and help them to gain the confidence in tech that I have. And that I really embrace this. I think this is the best advice I've been given.
Great. Thank you very much for being our guest today. I really enjoyed this interview, and I hope we can also encourage some more of our listeners to get into tech and just dip a first toe into the water and see how that goes. Because I really believe as well that doing those online courses and just starting with books and see what interests is a good way to start.
Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. And to all the people, especially the women out there who are wondering, is tech for me? Come to our meetups, come to our courses and get to know us, or just, write me a message. And I think that this is wonderful, the community that exists also here in Switzerland.
Thank you very much. I hope we see each other soon again at the next event.
We will. Thank you very much, Priska.
Thanks for tuning in today and listening to this inspiring talk on TechFace podcast. Want to be the first to know about the next episode or get first-hand access to our events? Join TechFace and sign up today on techface.ch. As a new member, you will get a free career coaching call and will always be the first to know about exciting events, news and insights. We look forward to welcoming you as our valued member.